January 22, 2026, the state of Jalisco woke up in flames. Not metaphorically, literally. Trucks were burning on the highways. Schools closed their doors. Highways were blocked. More than 2,000 additional soldiers were deployed within hours, and the population received a simple and direct warning: do not leave your homes. All of that happened because a man had died, a single man, and his death was enough to paralyze an entire region of Mexico. What kind of person has that kind of power? What kind of network can shake a state simply by disappearing? To understand it, we have to go back decades. We have to go to a small town surrounded by mountains in the state of Michoacán, where the central government was almost invisible, and the vacuum it left was always filled by someone else. That town was called Aguililla, and that is where Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes was born, the man the world would eventually come to know as El Mencho. In the 1970s and 1980s, Aguililla was a subsistence economy in a region where the state practically did not exist. The land produced what it produced. Legal money arrived rarely and late. But there was another economy, one that did function with precision. The farmer cultivated, the intermediary collected, the merchandise traveled at night, cash circulated at checkpoints, and shipments were divided near the border before the final crossing. It was a parallel system that operated more efficiently than many formal institutions. And for a region where poverty exceeded 50%, that system was also the main employer. In that context, El Mencho grew up, and at some point, like thousands of young people of his generation, he crossed north, California, the 1990s. The methamphetamine market was expanding rapidly. Law enforcement agencies in Los Angeles County were already recording a steady increase in cases related to that drug. It was a business that functioned in layers. At the top were those who brought the product, in the middle, those who moved it between cities, at the bottom, those who placed it on the streets. Nemesio operated within that system. He learned how a market was built. He learned which part of the chain was vulnerable and which part was irreplaceable. In 1992, he was arrested in California. Sale of methamphetamine, trial, conviction, and after serving his time, deportation to Mexico. That is the moment many analyses overlook, because when he returned, he did not come back as someone defeated. He came back with something more valuable than money. He returned with a mental map of how the business functioned on both sides of the border. Around the year 2000, he arrived in Jalisco. He did not arrive with an armed organization or with the resources to launch an immediate operation. He arrived to observe, to understand the local structure, and he began working within the Mencho cartel, handling logistics, arrangements with local authorities, and the movement of money. He was not the man on the front line. He was the man who made the machinery behind the front line work, and that position gave him something fundamental, a complete view of the system. He knew which routes were controlled by whom. He knew which officials had agreements. He knew where the cash flowed and where the bottlenecks were. Then, in June 2010, the Mexican government killed Ignacio Coronel Villarreal, one of the principal leaders of the Mencho cartel. The command structure fragmented. The different groups began fighting for control of zones and routes. The power vacuum that always ends up being filled by someone opened once again. And Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes knew exactly what to do with that vacuum. Between late 2010 and early 2011, he built his own circle of commanders, field operators active in Jalisco, men with deep knowledge of the territory. Little by little, the weapons, the routes, and the cash began gravitating toward his orbit. And when he had enough critical mass, he gave that structure a name, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the CJNG. The initial strategy was as calculated as it was brutal. The group appeared publicly calling itself Los Matazetas, announcing that they were cleaning areas of other gangs. It was a positioning message, but the real objective was not morality, it was displacement, eliminating the existing networks in order to occupy the space they left behind. City by city, the pattern repeated. First, the bribe. If the bribe did not work, the attack. And that is how the organization grew, absorbing territory, commanders, and routes until it became something the security agencies of both countries could no longer ignore. May 1st, 2015 was recorded as the moment when the CJNG demonstrated how far it was willing to go. Units of the Mexican army were advancing on a rural area of Jalisco with concrete intelligence about the possible location of the cartel leadership. The operation had air support. The perimeter was almost complete. Then the shooting began. It was not an improvised response. It was a response prepared in advance from elevated positions with heavy weapons, and at a precise moment during the confrontation, a rocket-propelled projectile was fired directly at one of the military helicopters. The impact was direct. The aircraft crashed. 9 members of the security forces died in that incident. The message sent by that action was unmistakable. This organization was not only capable of resisting the state, it was capable of attacking it directly and making it pay a high price. After that day, El Mencho disappeared even deeper into clandestinity. He constantly changed location between the mountains of Jalisco and Michoacan. He used satellite phones. He communicated through a small inner circle. He left minimal digital traces. He was a target who knew exactly how not to be found. For years, Mexican and American agencies searched for him without success. The DEA raised the reward for information leading to his capture to $5 million, one of the highest offered in all of Latin America. That number said 2 things simultaneously: that capturing him was an absolute priority, and that doing so was extremely difficult. But every network has a weak point. And when an operation depends on multiple countries, dozens of supply routes, and hundreds of local commanders, a single mistake at a single point can begin to reveal the entire structure. At the end of 2025, the DEA detected something: a pattern change in the fentanyl and methamphetamine distribution chain. Certain routes had changed suddenly. Some shipments repeatedly appeared linked to the same central network. Data analysis indicated that a high-level coordinator had become active again. That information was shared with Mexican agencies. The Secretariat of National Defense and the National Guard began joint intelligence coordination. The division of labor was precise. The American agencies focused on signals, intelligence, and financial tracking. Mexican forces handled ground surveillance and tactical planning. At the beginning of January 2026, a rural property in the Tapalpa area of Jalisco appeared on the radar. The place was remote, but there were signs of constant supplies arriving. Small satellite phone emissions were repeating from that same zone. On the mountain roads, unusual security activity had been detected. The first 10 days were only mapping. No one acted. No one moved. They only observed. Then drone surveillance began. Nighttime thermal images recorded activity inside. Human sources confirmed that high-level meetings were being held at that property. The location of a close collaborator appeared again and again linked to that same place. When signals tracking, human intelligence, and aerial surveillance converged on the same point, the decision was made to move forward. 6 to 8 weeks of surveillance had given the agencies sufficient confidence. 2 days before February 22nd, the area began to be sealed quietly. Local traffic was diverted. The outer perimeter was reinforced. Air support was placed on alert. American agencies provided real-time data, but full command of the operation was in Mexican hands. On the morning of the operation, the occupants of the compound were ordered to surrender. The response came in the form of gunfire from inside. The complex had been prepared with a defensive layout: solid walls, limited access points, a rear exit toward the wooded area. Drone cameras captured figures fleeing in that direction. Ground units advanced and began clearing the compound room by room. In the crossfire that occurred at the rear of the property, he was gravely wounded. The medical team conducted the initial assessment on site. Then, through biometric verification and DNA analysis cross-checked at multiple levels, the identity was confirmed. The person killed was Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes. And that explains what happened next. The fires on the highways, the trucks blocking roads, the schools closed, the 2,000 additional soldiers deployed within hours. An organization built over decades on fear, territorial control, and the figure of a man who was never captured alive reacted in the only way it knows how to react. Because that is the difference between a state and a criminal organization. The state can lose its leaders and continue functioning. An organization built around a single figure, when that figure disappears, does not yet know what it is without him. The question that remains open is not who El Mencho was. We already know that. The question is what comes next. What happens to the structure he built? What happens to the routes, the commanders, the agreements, and the money when the center no longer exists? That is always the second part of the story, and that part is still being written.